Hi, welcome to my first video, Get Lit Up, where I will share a snippet of information about a certain piece of literature. Today, I will talk about an essay called Professions for Women by author Virginia Woolf. The video will be comprised in the following three parts. First, I'll explain about Virginia Woolf, the writer. Next, I'll summarize and analyze her essay, Professions for Women, and then end with some discussion questions that link this 20th century piece of literature to recent issues of women in jobs today. Now, let's get lit up. Virginia Woolf is an English writer who is considered today as one of the most important modernist 20th century authors. She was born in London, 1882, to Julia Jackson Duckworth, who came from a publisher's family, and Sir Leslie Stephen, a Victorian critic, philosopher, biographer, and scholar. Both her parents had been previously married with children from those previous marriages, so in her early childhood, Woolf grew up in a large, extended, and talented family. She was known to frequent her father's immense library and educate herself on critical Victorian intellectuals, even teaching herself Greek. However, her childhood had some dark incidents in which Woolf would later struggle with during her lifetime. Her older half-brother had sexually abused her. Her mother died in 1895, which would begin the several mental breakdowns Woolf would deal with. Her favorite half-sister died in 1897, her father in 1904, and her brother also passed away in 1906. After 1904, Woolf and her family moved to a London district called Bloomsbury, where they became part of the Bloomsbury Group. The Bloomsbury Group is a group of artists that included painter Vanessa Bell, playwright E.M. Forster, art critic Roger Fry, economist John Maynard Keynes, Woolf's future husband Leonard Woolf, and more. They focused mainly on the middle-upper class of London intellectuals and were liberal about sex and sexuality. Indeed, there were complex love affairs, threesomes within the group members, and even Woolf was a bisexual who had an affair with the poet Vita Sackville West, who became the inspiration behind Woolf's novel Orlando, which is about an androgynous protagonist who changes gender identities over historical periods. Underneath, however, Woolf suffered from severe periods of depression and even tried to commit suicide by drowning herself in 1941. This was partly induced by a World War II fear of being arrested by the Nazi Gestapo if they invaded Britain, and a fear of losing her mind. Yet despite her personal struggles, Woolf wrote prolifically and with major success. As a novelist, Woolf pioneered the use of the stream of consciousness as a narrative device. She shunned the materialism of her contemporary writers, abandoned linear narratives, and delved into interior monologues, personal identity, and relationships using the stream of consciousness. This characteristic method is seen particularly in her novels Jacob's Room, Mrs. Dalloway, To the Lighthouse, and The Waves. Woolf was not only a novelist, but a famous reviewer and essayist as well. Over the course of her career, she became interested in the social position of women, particularly of women with professions. Her most famous essay, A Room of One's Own, is based on a collection of lectures called Women and Fiction, which she gave to female students of Cambridge University. Here, she writes her famously quoted line, "A woman must have money and a room of her own if she is to write fiction." In all, Virginia Woolf is important not only as a novelist who pioneered the stream of consciousness device, but also an inspirational feminist writer as well. Among the many works Woolf wrote, I will talk about her essay, Professions for Women, which is originally a speech read out to the Women's Service League, an organization of women aspiring to hold professions in 1931. It is a relatively short essay and an easy segue into Woolf's feminist works and opinions. She even echoes her points made in A Room of One's Own, published 2 years prior, particularly at the end of her essay, which I will elaborate further on. In the beginning, Woolf first addresses her crowd and puts on a very humble persona. Almost humorously, she says that the secretary of the Women's Service League suggested that I might tell you something about my own professional experiences. It is true I am a woman. It is true I am employed. But what professional experiences have I had? This is almost too modest because at this time, Woolf is a very well-known author and public figure, but she constantly downplays her talents on being a literary writer. For example, she explains the writing profession as an easy road paved already by Fanny Burney, by Aphra Behn, by Harriet Martineau, by Jane Austen, by George Eliot, all great female writers. And she mentions that writing was a reputable and harmless occupation. The family peace was not broken by the scratching of a pen. No demand was made upon the family purse. The cheapness of writing paper is, of course, the reason why women have succeeded as writers before they have succeeded in other professions. Likewise, she describes the writing profession as if it is relatively easy, socially acceptable, and financially convenient. Indirectly, she is also humbling herself while elevating her audience members, which would have been women aspiring for male-dominated jobs like doctors, engineers, etc. But arguably still, literature is a male-dominated profession as well. Then Woolf launches into anecdotes, her own experience as a woman in her profession. And while describing her experiences, she gives 2 lessons that she learned all women must overcome when entering the public sphere. The first point is what she calls killing the angel in the house. While Woolf is writing this in the early 20th century, we need to go back to the 19th century Victorian England to understand this concept. The Angel in the House is actually the title of a poem written by Coventry Patmore, published in 1854 to 62. Patmore is idolizing his wife to be a domestic angel, and this poem became so popular that it spread the idea that all women should be the angel in their own homes. In her essay, Woolf explains the concept very well. She was intensely sympathetic. She was immensely charming. She was utterly unselfish. She excelled in the difficult arts of family life. She sacrificed herself daily. If there was a chicken, she took the leg. If there was a draught, she sat in it. Above all, she was pure. Thus, the angel in the house is the Victorians' ultimate form of a woman as a housekeeper and wife that still served as the ideal woman image of Woolf's time. Thus, Woolf uses this concept of the angel in the house to serve as a metaphor for society's oppression on what an ideal woman is. Interestingly, she describes the angel as a very physical being, as if she were a real person who prevented Woolf from writing creatively and freely. My dear, you are a young woman. Be sympathetic, be tender, flatter, deceive. Use all the arts and wiles of our sex. Never let anybody guess that you have a mind of your own. Above all, be pure, she would say, and try to guide Woolf's pen. Equally, Woolf describes the killing of the angel in very physical terms. I turned upon her and caught her by the throat. I took up my inkpot and flung it at her. Woolf explains that she needed to kill the angel who constantly came back to block the writing of her honest, free ideas. I did my best to kill her. My excuse, if I were to be had in a court of law, would be that I acted in self-defense. Had I not killed her, she would have killed me. She would have plucked the heart of my writing. But since the angel is not an actual person, Woolf also mentions that it is far harder to kill a phantom than a reality. She was always creeping back when I thought I had dispatched her. In all, Woolf describes killing the angel as a real experience and an essential part of the occupation of a woman writer. The second point Woolf makes about female professions is talking about their bodily experience. With the angel in the house or social oppression of women out of the way, only the woman herself remains. But Woolf questions her audience. What is herself? I mean, what is a woman? Woolf thinks that nobody can know until she has expressed herself in all the arts and professions open to human skill. She then continues on another anecdote, this time how she herself goes about writing her own bodily experience. Here, Woolf uses a fishing analogy to better describe her point. She likens herself to a fisherman who is fishing on a deep lake with a rod held out over the water. Remember that Woolf really liked the stream of consciousness? This deep lake is her consciousness, and she described her writing process as a fisherman who has to probe about her consciousness to find a submerged truth. She finally gets a good idea, and the fishing line rushes through her hands and into the darker depths of her conscious. But all of a sudden, there's a smash, an explosion, foam, and confusion. And the fisherman is roused from her dream because she had thought of something about the body, about the passions, which was unfitting for her as a woman to say. Men, her reason told her, would be shocked. The consciousness of what men will say of a woman who speaks the truth about her passion had roused her from her artist state of unconsciousness. She could write no more. Therefore, in this experience, Woolf describes another type of oppression that men impede onto a woman's creative thinking or her profession, particularly when talking about her bodily experiences. Conclusion of her essay, Woolf summarizes her two experiences, killing the angel and telling the truth about her own experiences as a body. She ends her speech with several notes to consider. 1. She mentions that even when the path is nominally open, when there is nothing to prevent a woman from being a doctor, a lawyer, a civil servant, there are many phantoms and obstacles, as I believe, looming in her way. To discuss and define them is, I think, of great value and importance. In other words, she says that though women in future generations may not exactly fight the Victorian notion of the angel in the house, there are different forms of oppression women will encounter. One way to do this is by defining what those phantoms are so that we can diagnose the problem and find a solution together, both as men and women. Another point she concludes with is what she mentions in her previous essay, A Room of One's Own. She says, "You have won rooms of your own, hitherto exclusively owned by men. But this freedom is only a beginning. The room is your own, but it is still bare. It has to be furnished. It has to be decorated. It has to be shared. How are you going to furnish it? How are you going to decorate it? With whom are you going to share it, and upon what terms?" Likewise, by using a metaphor that women becoming more independent can be in control of their own literal and symbolic spaces, we also need to think of the logistics behind how to expand it and share it as well. But Woolf ends on a hopeful note, that for the first time in history, you are able to ask these questions. For the first time, you are able to decide for yourselves what the answers should be. After going through the text together, what do you think about Virginia Woolf's essay, Professions for Women? Does it still speak to you, a person living in the 21st century, and perhaps as a person who lives in a different country altogether? Is it still relevant? Some other questions we can think of and discuss together are about the two main points Woolf makes. First, regarding the killing of the angel in the house, which is a very Victorian concept. What are some phantoms that women are unconsciously oppressed by today? How can we define and outline some solutions for taking them down? What do you think are the bodily experience of a woman? Do you think after 100 years of fighting for women's rights, we have reached an answer? Thanks for watching the first video of Get Lit Up. This video was made as a part of a video series created by students for the Brain Korea BK21 Plus project at the English Literature and Language Department of Yonsei University. For more information about BK21 Plus, please click the link below. Thanks for watching.